My greetings to you all and welcome to our 11th episode of Afrolit 21 podcast. This episode is titled The United Nations at a Crossroad, Which Way to Go? And before going into the detailed part, I would like to start with clarifying my affiliation with the United Nations. As a chemical engineer student, I never imagined to be associated with the United Nations. Incidentally, due to the focus of my final project, I happened to be a good candidate for a regional project for United Nations Industrial Development Organization. So shortly after completing my undergraduate study in 1989, I was employed by UNIDO as the national project coordinator for a regional program on industrial wastewater purification in Africa. Over the years, I took short national, regional, and international assignments for a number of UN agencies. And in 2003, I became an international staff, full-time staff of UNEP, and served for 13 years holding different positions, which included serving as the head of the Global Business and Industry Program and the Deputy Director for Africa. In August 2016, I took an early retirement from the UN and went back to academic teaching and research work. So I have invested significant part of my time and knowledge in the United Nations program, particularly in the program that is related to the promotion of sustainable industrial development. And this allowed me to expand my knowledge and at the same time contribute to the emerging knowledge in the area and its implementation in the developing world particularly. So based on this, I feel that the United Nations is an important organization for the world, and I would like to see it succeeding in the coming years and decades. So this episode is driven by that interest, nothing more than that. So as the title indicated, we're saying that the United Nations is standing at a crossroad. This is because multilateralism has recently come under a severe threat with a growing trend of multipolar world driven by competition for resources that have increasingly become scarce. And this is largely orchestrated by the so-called super and middle powers, which are trying to position themselves in the global geopolitical dynamics, current complex global environment. In addition to that, the existing architecture of the United Nations system has continuously become obsolete to respond to the increasing complexity of the emerging challenge. The challenge have become more and more complex, but the existing architecture of the United Nations system is not adaptive enough to respond to this increasing complexity in a more efficient way. And the call for reform has reached its peak. Over the years, there have been a number of calls for reforming the United Nations system, mainly driven by the global north. But it has reached its peak with the attendant cut of financial contribution, leading to the UN 80 reform process with significant cuts across agencies. Right now, we're at the moment where there will be a new leadership coming at the beginning of 2027 as the term of the current SG comes to an end by the end of the year. So while the organization is going through so many changing dynamics that are causing significant threat even at the level of its existence, there will be a leadership transfer, and that creates a big question as to where the United Nations will go in the coming years. And that is why we're saying that it is at the crossroad. So we have the doubters and the realists when it comes to the United Nations. The United Nations has always been a target of various forms of attacks and smear campaign by those groups who wish to have a total control of global geopolitics. This used to happen during the Cold War, and even after the Cold War, there was some period of normalcy, but eventually it has picked up again, especially with the changing political dynamics in the Western countries. In recent years, the campaign to systematically erode the global convening power of the UN was on high octane, with some major powers taking the lead. So there are emerging blocks of countries that are trying to overtake some of the role that used to be carried out by the United Nations system. An example, you have the one block which is led by the States, another block led by European countries, another block led by China, another block led by the so-called middle power countries, particularly from the Middle and the Near East. So all of these geopolitical platforms are trying to position themselves in such a way that they will have increasing influence in the global multilateral system. While these are the external factors, within the organization, the increasing resource misallocation and inefficient utilization across the system, and its inability to adapt with changing global dynamics has exposed it to growing criticism, with some calling it redundant and useless. They even go to the extent of saying that United Nations do not have any more use for the global community, which is hard to believe. While recognizing its inherent organizational weakness, we need to realize that most of its major weakness and strengths are a function of the least common denominator of its members. So whatever failure we're talking about of the United Nations system is the failure of the member countries, particularly those member countries which have significant say in the decision of the United Nations system on how its organizational structure is evolving. Every country across the world is trying to have a piece of the United Nations system, either fully or partially. All of this is an outcome of negotiation within and between countries. It's not something that is decided by the Secretary General alone or even the UN Secretariat. The UN Secretariat is there to implement whatever has been decided by the member countries. So whatever weakness we are talking about, it is generally a reflection of the weakness of the nation states, which are the member states of the United Nations system, which are making the final decision. Against all odds, there are some significant legacy that was left by the United Nations, which no one can question. Number one, it has been instrumental in maintenance of global peace, including avoiding another world war, which could have been a devastating nuclear war. Just for the fact that it is a platform where everyone comes and vents whatever disappointment or disagreement they may have, served its purpose in terms of avoiding major conflicts and global war. It also provided the framework for the protection of basic human rights and the critical political support to the struggle against colonialism, which led to the liberation of many countries in the global south. The speed of anti-colonial struggle that came after the establishment of the United Nations was very fast, and that is why most of the colonized countries started to become independent in the 1950s and the 1960s, where the United Nations served as a very important platform to promote the anti-colonial struggle. It has also effectively served as a global convening platform for developing global consensus on major economic, social, and environmental challenges. This has been more significantly evident since the first United Nations Conference on Environment and Development that was held in 1992, which led to the major global environmental treaties, including the Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biological Diversity, Convention on Combating Desertification, and many others have followed since, covering different areas of concern, which are of significant benefit to the global community, to the international community. And the UN served as a very valuable platform to facilitate that. And as much as it has many organizational weaknesses that need to be addressed, never has been the need for such a global body so high as it is today, because we are entering into a major global era where a confluence of crises are coming together. It's not only the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, but the socio-economic crisis, the technological potential crisis, and many of them are coming together in which the international community need to act together. These are not crises that could be addressed by any country single-handedly or a block of countries separately. It requires a global consensus. It requires a global understanding. It requires a global approach. And I don't see any other platform other than the United Nations which could serve this purpose. So we're at this critical moment, and we're entering now the area of electing a new Secretary General, and the campaign for this has already started. There are 3 ladies and 2 gentlemen who are currently campaigning for the position of the Secretary General at this historic moment and very challenging moment. And never has there been a lady at the helm of the United Nations, and many, including myself, believe that it is about time to have a woman Secretary General as head of the United Nations. And on 10th June, the 3 women candidates made a passionate case about the required change of direction and their priorities. The 2 gentlemen who are campaigning for the position did not show up for this session, and I think it would be appropriate if they graciously bow out of the competition. Here is the question that comes: will the coming years be moments of revival or relevance? Potentially, the crossroad leads to 2 directions. With the incoming leadership and with the change in the overall perception and understanding and engagement with the United Nations system, we may either be able to revive the United Nations system so that it could be fit for the purpose for the coming challenge, or continue with the same business as usual that could lead to increasing irrelevance and eventually the demise of the United Nations, as it happened with its predecessor, the League of Nations. And I hope we'll be able to steer towards the revival dimension, and this would require more sober thinking across all levels. So the second part of the episode focuses on the revival part. In order to revive the United Nations system, what do we need to do? Which way we should go? Looking back at the discussion, the session that was held by the candidates for the Secretary General positions, all of the candidates have an impressive diplomatic and leadership experience, including the UN experience from within the system. With the exception of the few new ideas that were highlighted, most of the perspectives they shared have been understandably more of the same, which is a pity essentially, because it does not reflect the enormity of the challenge that the United Nations will face in the coming years. It's more about the business as usual kind of orientation, with some peripheral tinkering here and there. I believe that the United Nations has close to zero chance of surviving the current challenge with a reform agenda that would tinker at the periphery. We need to face the reality and be able or be prepared to make significant transformational change across the United Nations system if we wish to make it more suitable for the coming decades. If the incoming Secretary General wishes to sort of revive the UN, she or he, hopefully she, need to address the fundamental structural limitations of the organizations. It's not about making small change here or small change there. You need to understand the structural limitations of the organization and face it from practical perspective, so that the organization can move forward. And in that regard, I have highlighted here 4 major fundamental issues that needs to be considered. The first one is restructuring the UN system. The existing UN structure that is extremely fragmented and siloed is a major source of inertia for change, besides resulting in huge resource misutilization. There are more than perhaps 35 agencies under the UN system, and each of them have got their own specific mandate, their own specific governance structure, their own specific procedure, which is highly complex and acts as a source of inertia for making any meaningful change across the UN system. And it is also confusing most countries as they go down to the country's level, having their own portfolio in different ways. Besides resulting in extensive duplication of functions and mandates accompanied with top-heavy management structure, it has also led to unproductive competition. There is always a lot of turf war, either in the corridor or the back office, or in some cases openly, that clearly shows that there is this fragmentation of mandate that position one leadership with another leadership and so on. And attempting to deal with this through interventions at the periphery, which has been attempted, by the way, starting from the time of Kofi Annan. There has been an effort to address this fragmentation in different ways, including delivering as one program and the development of the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, which is known as UNDAF at the country's level for coordination. But most of that effort led to, at best, suboptimal outcome rather than making significant dent in terms of making progress in improving UN efficiency and effectiveness. The new Secretary General, and of course with the support of member countries, need to consider restructuring and consolidating the existing agencies under key clusters aligned with its mandate and the global reality. This effort has been in the air for some time. Even myself, I was involved in during the early days of the discussion or development of the Sustainable Development Goals, where we brought this idea forward. by way of streamlining the organizational structure within the UN system so that it could be instrumental for effective and efficient implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. But it didn't fly for long because it was killed the moment it reached New York, and where every UN agency is congregated to get the piece of the cake, that idea was thrown out of the window. And that is one of the sad experience I had. And in fact, it has contributed also to my decision of retirement from the UN system, because I felt that I don't see myself to be adding any value to the ongoing process, even if I could have better opportunities within the system. And one important additional point is development has always been regarded as an add-on mandate of the United Nations, despite the three core mandates of the United Nations could never be fully met without it. So in most cases, most of the development-related initiatives within the United Nations system are recognized as additional kind of function of the UN rather than being at the core of it. As a result, most of the development-related programs have been more of reactive interventions in response to a combination of crises, instead of being more transformational processes that could benefit countries and the global community. Even the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, which were well-intended and significant effort have gone into them, are at best suboptimal because of this orientation. It's always an add-on. So you talk about Millennium Development Goals, there is a department somewhere. You talk about SDG, there is a department somewhere, and instead of being part of whatever being carried out both by UN agencies and by nation states. This, combined with the siloed and fragmented state structure and function at countries level, made the Sustainable Development Goal implementation a departmental function rather than being fully integrated in the National Development Plan. Both in terms of policy, planning, and budgeting. When you look at the country's level, there is the core part of the development process, and then the SDG comes as an add-on. This is not a serious way of promoting sustainable development. Sustainable development is about changing the development paradigm. It's about taking a different development track. It's not about adding another dimension to the conventional way of doing development. If the UN wishes to be an effective agent for an inclusive and sustainable development, it needs to shift its focus from reacting to crisis to promotion of adaptive and transformational development at the country's level. I know this will require huge amount of effort, starting from overcoming the individual and institutional inertia that the system by itself could generate, and both in terms of the vested interest of many countries pushing or pulling the UN system this way or that way. It's a huge challenge. But if we are serious about making progress in the 21st century, which, by the way, will be to the benefit of everybody, it is important to adapt a new direction and a new orientation when it comes to our development effort. The other critical challenge that we are facing today, it is coming in a very significant way, is the impact of frontier technologies on every part of our life. And unless the global community is prepared, starting from understanding these impacts, what could it be? How could they be managed? How can we maximize the benefit and reduce the adverse impact of whatever technology that would be generated? The so-called disruptive technologies. It is very critical. Unfortunately, it is the technologists who are talking about the importance of understanding and addressing this issue rather than the global leaders. And reducing the potential threats and maximizing the benefits of emerging frontier technologies would require developing effective socio-technological governance regimes at all levels, guided by robust and participatory social innovation. Technological innovation has always been there, and that it has major contribution to the improvement of the well-being of people. But when it comes to reducing its adverse impact and maximizing the benefit, it is the social innovation dimension which is critical. So when you have a balanced approach between the technological and social innovation captured in a socio-technological governance region, then we'll benefit more from the emerging technologies and reduce their adverse impacts. Otherwise, if we continue with the business as unusual, in a couple of years' time, when perhaps in a decade time, we'll reach a point where we'll have a planet that is not possible to recognize. It will lead to major change. So in this context, we need to have a proper socio-technological governance region at a global level that could guide countries and companies to the right direction and make sure that they will not lead to significant adverse impact. In this regard, I strongly advocate for shifting the strategic focus of the development and deployment of AI-related technologies from profit and power focused to human and ecosystems well-being focus. By the way, technology, right from the beginning of the first invention, technology has been always captured by the powerful groups and used for maximizing profit and consolidating power, always throughout the history of human society. If you wish to have more information on this, it will be good to read the book published by the 2024 Nobel Prize winners of economics, which is focused on progress and power. And it clearly shows how technology has been captured at different stages and used to maximize profit and consolidate power. If we allow the current emerging disruptive frontier technologies to move along the same line, that will be a major disaster. So it is important at this point in time, we redirect our effort to make sure that the emerging technologies are focused on improving human well-being and ecosystem well-being, which are the major challenges and desirable goals that needs to be achieved collectively. Finally, the global geopolitical dynamics. In this regard, multipolarity driven by super and middle power interests seems to be the dominant feature of the global geopolitical dynamics of the 21st century. So we cannot write them off. They are a reality, they are here, and we need to accept that as the part of the current reality. But while the emerging multipolar geopolitical dynamics may lead to some benefits, particularly to developing countries, if they are smart enough to manage it to their own interest, it could also be a source of tension and conflict. So there is that potential, as much as it may have a number of added value in terms of the global geopolitical dynamics, at least balancing the power distribution across the globe. It could also be a source of tension and conflict. So when the United Nations, one of the functions of the United Nations has to be maintaining a delicate balance between multipolarity and multilateralism while maintaining the authority and credibility of the United Nations. This would be one of the major tasks perhaps the incoming Secretary General will be facing and need to work on. And besides reforming the UN Security Council and the international financial architecture, there is a need for counterbalancing the veto power of the permanent members through a moderating voting power of the General Assembly. I mean, there is now a general consensus that the membership of the Security Council, permanent membership of the Security Council, need to increase, with a focus on giving some seats for Africa and Latin America, perhaps. But there has to be a voting proportion somehow, either 75%, whatever Security Council decides. If the General Assembly endorses a decision with 75% or even 90% membership, it should be governing across the UN system. And the UN system should not be a prisoner of one nation state that has a veto power, even if it is an African new member country. I mean, I'm not selecting this or that. Any of the UN Security Council permanent members should not have an absolute veto on what the UN system decides. There has to be a limit for that. And that is why this has to be considered by member states, and the Secretary General has to advocate for that. Otherwise, the UN system will continue lose its credibility and become redundant. So I hope these points will help the discussion and the deliberation and even the reflection of the candidates for the Secretary General. And I just want to put the idea out there so that it can be a basis for further discussion. For more information and previous episodes, you may visit our website at www.afrolit21.com or contact us at info@afrolit21.com. Thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you in my next episode. Thank you.